Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into, well, a stack of sources about a historical figure you probably think you know pretty well, or rather, a historical animal, one of history's most famous horses, actually.
That's right.
Because when we talk about Napoleon Bonaparte, there's one name that often just gallops into the conversation, doesn't it?
Marengo.
Marengo, the gray-white Arabian, his steadfast war horse. You picture him at all those campaigns, even Waterloo, that's the image,
You've
right?
left you the popular image, the one that sticks.
But our mission today is to really unpack the truth behind this equine legend. We're going to be pulling apart historical accounts, academic research, museum exhibits, all sorts of things, just to see if Marengo was, truly the horse we imagine him to be, or if there's maybe a more surprising story under the surface.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here, I think, is how a single historical detail can just sort of balloon into a symbol.
Yeah.
Sometimes it even overshadows the actual facts.
Right.
So we'll be looking at how memory and public fascination, even how the British felt about Napoleon after defeating him, how all that shaped the story of this particular horse.
Okay, so let's kick things off with that popular image, the legend of Marengo. We hear he was Napoleon's absolute favorite, this light-colored Arabian, known for incredible stamina, reliability, carried him through campaign after campaign, famously linked with Waterloo. Is that basically the story we usually get?
That's pretty much it, yes.
Yeah.
The common narrative paints him as this extraordinary Arabian stallion, one of Napoleon's main war horses, serving him for, over 15 years, through massive battles like Austerlitz, Jena Auerstedt, Wagram. And he was a real Arabian, relatively small, 14.1 hands high, so roughly 135 centimeters, and definitely a light gray or grayish white. That part seems to hold up.
Okay, but here's where it starts to get really interesting, isn't it? Because while Marengo is so celebrated, some historians, well, they actually doubt if a horse named Marengo even existed in Napoleon's time. And if he did, was he really that horse? The one from the legends? Because the name itself, Marengo, supposedly named after that narrow victory against the Austrians in June 1800.
Right, the Battle of Marengo.
That name just doesn't show up. Not in the imperial stable registers, not in other French archives. What's the story there?
Well, that's really the core of the mystery, isn't it? If he wasn't officially called Marengo, then what was his actual identity?
Yeah.
There's an Australian researcher, Jill Hamilton, who wrote a whole book on this, called Napoleon's Mythical Horse, actually.
Wow. Okay.
And she suggests that Marengo was very likely just a nickname for a different horse, one officially registered as
Ali.
Ali.
That's right. And this isn't just, a bit of trivia. It immediately shows how Napoleon's image and his actual history got tangled up, even down to his horses.
So Ali was this gray-white horse captured in Egypt, brought to France by Napoleon in 1799.
Correct.
And if this horse, Ali, is our Marengo,
Yeah.
here's the real kicker, isn't it?
This horse was apparently not ridden by Napoleon during the Battle of Marengo, the battle he's supposedly named after.
That's what the research indicates. He was kept available, in the stable, but wasn't the horse Napoleon actually rode that day.
Incredible. So the name itself is potentially wrong, and the origin story of the name is wrong, too.
It certainly seems that way.
Yeah.
And it doesn't stop there. This horse, whether we call him Marengo or Ali, also wasn't part of the disastrous Russian campaign in 1812.
Oh, really? Not on that famous retreat from Moscow.
No. During that time, he was actually stationed way back in Normandy. As a stud, believe it or not.
As a stud, so miles away from the fighting.
A very different picture from the legend, yes.
Yeah.
Far from the freezing battlefields. He only came back to the main Tuileries stables in Paris in 1815.
When Napoleon returned from Elba.
Exactly. During the 100 Days.
Yeah.
So that really challenges the idea of him being constantly by Napoleon's side through every single major event.
Okay, what about Waterloo then? That's like the defining image for many people. Marengo carrying the emperor into his final defeat.
Ugh. Waterloo. Yes, another cornerstone of the legend. But despite how powerful that image is, Napoleon definitely did not ride Marengo or Ali at Waterloo.
Definitely didn't.
The sources are quite clear. The only horse the emperor rode that day was named Désirée.
Désirée, like his old fiancée.
Exactly. Désirée Clary, who, funnily enough, later became Queen of Sweden and Norway.
Huh.
So Napoleon rode Désirée at Waterloo, not Marengo.
So the horse Marengo might not have been called Marengo by Napoleon, wasn't ridden at Marengo, wasn't in Russia, and wasn't ridden at Waterloo.
It really highlights this whole myth versus reality thing we're talking about, doesn't it?
Yeah.
While the horse, let's just call him the horse for now, was certainly part of Napoleon's stable, a real animal.
Right.
His specific role in these massive historical moments seems to be consistently, well, embellished in popular memory. And some historical sources even suggest the name Marengo might have been given to the horse after his capture.
By the British.
Possibly. Not by Napoleon or the French at all.
Yeah.
Which adds another layer entirely.
Okay, so the legends are definitely shaky, but the horse was real. What happened to him after Napoleon's final defeat at Waterloo? How did he end up becoming famous in Britain?
Right, so after Waterloo in 1815, Ali Hiri, the horse we now generally call Marengo, was captured by the British. Apparently, a British lieutenant spotted an N branded on the horse's skin.
An imperial N.
Exactly. So he correctly figured it was one of the emperor's riding horses. He was then sold to a lieutenant colonel in the Grenadier Guards and brought over to England.
And once he got to England, I imagine he caused quite a stir.
Oh, absolutely. He became an instant sensation. You have to remember, there was this huge public fascination with Napoleon in Britain.
Yeah, Napoleomania, you called it.
Exactly. It was intense.
Yeah.
So owning or even just seeing the emperor's famous horse, it allowed people to feel this sort of closer, almost emotional connection to the man they'd feared for so long.
Like touching a piece of history?
Precisely. The painter James Ward even did a large, quite famous painting of him in 1824. It shows the horse kind of looking off towards the horizon, the interpretation being, as if he's longing for his exiled master on St. Helena.
Wow, so the horse himself becomes a symbol of Napoleon's fate.
Very much so. It's quite remarkable how this animal became a sort of proxy for the British public's complex relationship with Napoleon, long after he was defeated. A national obsession, almost.
It's incredible. What a life for a horse. Becoming a celebrity after his owner's downfall. How long did he actually live? And what happened in the end?
Well, he lived a remarkably long time, actually. Died in 1832 at the ripe old age of 38.
38? That's ancient for a horse, isn't it?
It really is. Especially for one that had seen campaign life, even if not all of the ones legend claims. There was even an attempt, unsuccessful as it turned out, to use him as a stud in England.
And after he died, I read something about mounting him for display.
That was the plan, yes, to preserve the entire horse. But unfortunately, his skin was somehow lost. Technical difficulties, perhaps, or just poor handling at the time.
Oh, that's a shame. So what's left of him then?
What remains is his skeleton. And you can actually still see it today.
Why is that?
It's on display at the National Army Museum in London.
The skeleton. Okay.
Yes, although it's not quite complete. Two of his hooves are missing.
Missing. What happened to the hooves?
Well, one hoof has a rather famous, if slightly morbid, afterlife. It was turned into a snuff box.
A snuff box? Seriously?
Yes, apparently given as a sort of trophy or keepsake
Right.
to the officers of the Grenadier Guards, the regiment of the man who brought him to England.
Wow. And the other hoof?
The other one, well, it's just been lost to history, it seems. Nobody knows where it ended up. And the skeleton itself needed some work. It was apparently quite amateurishly mounted back in the 19th century. They actually had it restored fairly recently in 2017.
A skeleton with missing hooves, one turned into a snuff box. It really makes you think about how these historical artifacts, even bones, have their own strange journeys, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And just for comparison, there's another one of Napoleon's horses, Vizier.
Vizier.
Yes, another white Arabian thoroughbred. His skeleton is also on display.
Okay, where's Vizier?
Vizier is in Paris at the Musée de l'Armée. He was a gift to Napoleon from the Turkish Sultan Selim III back in 1805. He was with Napoleon for about 10 years, ridden at battles like Jena and Eylau. He even went with Napoleon to exile on St. Helena.
So Vizier actually went to St. Helena.
He did. And after Vizier died, he was successfully mounted, skin and all, unlike Marengo. You can see him there in the museum, complete with a crowned N branded on his left thigh.
But even with Vizier, this tangible artifact, I heard there's still a little bit of uncertainty.
You're right. Even the French Army Museum itself,
Yeah.
perhaps just, hedging its bets slightly.
Playing it safe.
Exactly. They have a little sign on the exhibit that includes the phrase, si c'est bien lui.
Which means,
If it is him.
if it is him, even with the mounted horse right there.
It just goes to show, doesn't it? Even the most seemingly concrete historical evidence can still carry a little whisper of mystery, a hint of doubt.
That's fascinating. It really puts Marengo's story in perspective.
It does. And we need to remember, Napoleon rode a lot of horses, probably 150, easily, over his career.
150.
Oh, yes. His secretary, a man named Agathon Thane, actually described his riding style. He said Napoleon rode, and I'm quoting loosely here, recklessly and dangerously. Apparently, he leaned right forward in the saddle, held the reins loosely in his right hand, left arm free, and just moved his whole body with the horse's rhythm.
Sounds intense.
It does. But it helps us understand the sheer number of horses involved and maybe why the specific identity of one might become blurred over time. The animals played a huge role, obviously, but maybe the individual horse mattered less than the symbol of Napoleon on horseback.
So you thought you knew Marengo, Napoleon's famous horse. Hopefully this deep dive has given you, well, some surprises, maybe a few aha moments, and hopefully a much richer picture of this little piece of history where the myth and the reality seem to be, well, incredibly tangled up.
I think what really stands out is just how powerful a name attached to an animal can become, how it grows into a symbol. The story of Marengo isn't just about a horse, is it? It's really about how we remember history, how stories get constructed over time, and how public feeling, that Napoleomania, for instance, can take a factual detail or maybe even a misremembered detail and turn it into something much bigger, much more iconic.
Yeah.
It definitely raises questions about how we interpret the past and how much of what we think we know is shaped by, well, what we want to believe or what stories resonate the most.
And that leads us right to our final thought for you to maybe chew on. Is something that seems as straightforward as Napoleon's favorite horse can actually hold so many layers of debate, legend, mistaken identity? What other historical figures or events might be hiding equally surprising truths behind their really well-known stories?
That's a great question.
What are the other famous narratives out there where the symbol has maybe completely overshadowed the factual details? Something to think about, perhaps, the next time you come across what seems like a totally undisputed historical fact.